Over 90% of our viewers haven't subscribed yet. If you love these stories, please subscribe. Your support is the inspiration that keeps this channel alive.
The airplane had completed only its second circle when Karen stormed onto my lawn, pointed at the sky, and demanded that I remove my house number from the atmosphere. I looked up at the banner floating above Willow Bend Estates. The numbers 4172 stretched nearly 40 feet across bright white fabric, followed by a cheerful red arrow pointing directly toward my roof. The pilot banked gently over the neighborhood, and every dog within 3 streets began barking as though they had finally received accurate directions. "I made it bigger," I said. Karen's mouth opened. That was the exact moment the airplane passed overhead again. 4172 arrow. The arrow appeared to point directly at her. My name is Nathan Cole, and I owned a modest brick house outside Tulsa, Oklahoma, in a neighborhood where residents could choose between 6 approved mailbox styles, but only 2 approved shades of emotional expression. Willow Bend Estates had curved streets, decorative ponds, and an HOA president named Patricia Vance, although everyone privately called her Karen because she had once issued a warning to a 7-year-old for drawing a hopscotch grid with nonseasonal chalk. Patricia believed visibility was the foundation of civilization. Trash cans had to be hidden. Garden hoses had to be hidden. Work vehicles had to be hidden. Yet house numbers, according to her, needed to be visible from the moon. My house number was mounted beside the front door in small brass numerals that had belonged to my parents. My father installed them when he and my mother bought the house in 1989, long before Willow Bend Estates had an HOA, decorative ponds, or a rule concerning the approved curvature of driveway edges. The numbers were simple, slightly tarnished, and only 4 inches tall. They were also perfectly readable from the street. I knew that because delivery drivers found my house, relatives found my house, and Patricia found my house every time she had a complaint. The trouble began when the HOA approved a new Emergency Address Visibility Initiative. The title made it sound as though half the community had been disappearing into fog. In reality, Patricia had attended a safety seminar, returned with a binder, and decided every home needed 12-inch reflective numbers mounted beside the garage. The approved numbers came in brushed silver. My house had brown trim. They looked like refrigerator magnets designed by a prison architect. Patricia delivered the first notice personally. She walked up my driveway carrying a measuring tape, a clipboard, and a sample number 8 large enough to serve as exercise equipment. "Nathan, your current address display is deficient." I looked at the brass numbers beside my door. They seem confident. "They're too small." "You found them." "I know where you live." "So does the mailman." "This is about emergency response." "The fire station is 6 minutes away." 6 minutes can become 7 if responders cannot identify a property. I nodded thoughtfully. "Then we should remove the trees." She frowned. "What?" "They block more of the house than the numbers." "We are not discussing trees." "We could paint the roof." "Nathan, maybe install a lighthouse." She held up the giant silver 8. "This is the approved size." I stared at it. That looks less like an address and more like a motel vacancy sign. Patricia explained that every resident had 30 days to install the approved numbers. The HOA had negotiated a neighborhood discount with a local sign company. Installation would cost $240, including removal of old numbers and surface preparation. My brass numbers had been attached with 4 screws. Apparently, the screws required professional counseling. I asked whether residents could choose their own design as long as it met the size and visibility requirements. Patricia said alternative designs required architectural approval. I asked what standards the committee would use. Consistency. That is not a measurement. It is a community goal. What if my numbers are larger than required? Her expression changed slightly. Within reason. That phrase stayed with me. Within reason was not a measurement, either. I thanked her for the notice and closed the door. That evening, I removed one brass number from the wall, polished it carefully, and put it back. I had no intention of replacing them. My father had spent an entire Saturday mounting those numbers because he refused to admit the first 3 drill holes were crooked. He eventually covered the mistakes with a small wooden plaque, told my mother it was decorative framing, and maintained that story until the day he died. The numbers were not valuable. They were ours. The next week, Patricia sent a second notice. This one included a photograph of my front door taken from the sidewalk. A red digital circle surrounded the brass numbers, and beneath the picture she had written, "Address not legible at distance." I stood at the exact spot where she had taken the photograph. I could read 4172 easily. My neighbor, Curtis Hale, walked past carrying a bag of dog food. "What are you staring at?" "My house number, 4172. "How far away are you?" He looked down the sidewalk. 40 feet? "Can you read it?" I just did. Patricia says it is not legible. Curtis adjusted the dog food bag. "Maybe she needs larger glasses." Patricia lived directly across from the main entrance, where she could observe every vehicle entering Willow Bend Estates. Her house number consisted of 12-inch silver digits mounted beside the garage. They reflected sunlight so aggressively that drivers occasionally slowed down, thinking they had encountered a warning sign. Curtis glanced toward her house. "Those things can signal aircraft." That was when the idea arrived. It was not fully formed. It was more like a small, irresponsible bird landing inside my brain. "What kind of aircraft?" I asked. Curtis looked at me. "No. I only asked a question. You have the expression you wore before installing that motion-activated skeleton at Halloween. The skeleton reduced package theft. It also saluted Patricia for 3 weeks. She kept approaching the porch." Curtis walked away before becoming legally associated with whatever I was thinking. I called a local aerial advertising company the following morning. The man who answered introduced himself as Earl Dobbins. He had the relaxed voice of someone who had spent 30 years listening to strange banner requests and no longer believed human beings had a bottom. "I need a banner flown over a residential neighborhood." "What's the message?" 4172. There was a pause. "That's it?" "Maybe an arrow." "Birthday?" "No." "Marriage proposal?" "No." "Debt collection?" "No." "Political?" "Absolutely not." Another pause. "You want an airplane to fly a house number?" "Yes." "Why?" "The HOA says it's too small." Earl laughed so loudly I had to move the phone away from my ear. When he recovered, he asked how often I wanted the flight. I said every Saturday morning for 1 month, assuming the price was reasonable. He quoted an amount that was not exactly reasonable, but was still cheaper than letting Patricia remove my father's brass numbers and replace them with giant silver refrigerator parts. I agreed. Earl emailed the banner design that afternoon. The first version displayed 4172 in black. I asked him to make it larger. He sent a second version. I asked whether the arrow could point downward. He added the arrow. Then I asked whether the words "visible enough" could appear beneath the number. Earl called me personally. "You're fighting with someone." I prefer the word educating. The longer message needs a larger banner. How large? Large enough to become a community discussion. Perfect. I signed the contract. The first Saturday arrived bright, clear, and windier than expected. Earl warned me that the flight might be delayed if conditions became unsafe. I sat on my porch with coffee, pretending not to wait. At 9:30, nothing happened. At 10, Curtis wandered over with his dog. You look disappointed. I'm enjoying the morning. You have binoculars. Birdwatching. You're looking toward the airport. Airborne birds. At 10:12, we heard the engine. The plane approached from the south, climbed above the subdivision, and entered a wide circle around Willow Bend Estates. Behind it stretched the largest address display in the history of residential architecture. 4,172 visible enough? Curtis lowered the dog food bag he had inexplicably brought again. Oh, Nathan. The banner floated above the neighborhood like a message from a deeply petty government. Children ran into the street, pointing upward. Garage doors opened. Residents stepped onto porches in slippers and bathrobes. One elderly man removed his hearing aids, cleaned them, and put them back as though sound might explain what he was seeing. The plane completed another circle. Someone began applauding. Patricia's front door opened. She stepped outside holding a watering can, looked up, and froze so completely that water continued pouring onto one shoe. The airplane passed directly above her house. 4172. Visible enough? Curtis leaned toward me. You should go inside. Why? She can't identify who did it. The arrow pointed toward my roof. Good point. Patricia marched across the street. By the time she reached my lawn, nearly 20 residents had gathered along the sidewalk. Some were laughing, others were taking pictures. A teenager had begun live streaming the banner while narrating Patricia's approach like a wildlife documentary. She stopped at the bottom of my porch steps. Did you hire that aircraft? I looked up. The number is certainly visible. This is harassment. It doesn't mention you. It is mocking an HOA safety initiative. It is demonstrating compliance. You were instructed to enlarge the number on your house. The notice says the address must be clearly visible. From the street. The sky contains several viewing angles. Her face tightened. This cannot continue. It is scheduled every Saturday. The surrounding residents reacted immediately. Every Saturday? One man checked his phone calendar. A woman in a robe asked whether future flights would be at the same time. Patricia heard them. You scheduled repeated flights? Consistency is a community goal. Curtis turned away and coughed into his hand. Patricia pointed toward my brass numbers. Those still violate the new standard. The plane makes them redundant. The airplane is not attached to the property. Neither are delivery drivers. That makes no sense. It makes exactly as much sense as replacing readable numbers because you prefer silver. Her voice dropped. You are creating a spectacle. The plane circled again. The banner crossed behind her head, and the teenager live streaming whispered, "Perfect timing." Patricia turned toward the crowd. This is not entertainment. A little boy looked at his mother. Can we come next Saturday? The mother nodded. Patricia returned her attention to me. You will cancel the flights. No. You will install the approved numbers. No. You will attend an enforcement hearing Monday. I smiled. That sounds more likely. She marched back across the street while the airplane completed its final circle. The neighborhood remained outside long after it disappeared. Residents discussed the banner, compared photographs, and asked whether I had paid extra for the arrow. One woman said her visiting mother had finally found the correct street because she followed the plane. A delivery driver stopped and asked whether House 4172 was selling something. Curtis told him we were offering aerial directions. The driver nodded, as though that explained everything. By noon, photographs of the banner had spread through local social media. Someone posted a video titled, "Tulsa Man Takes HOA Address Rule Literally." Another person added dramatic music. By dinner, the video had more than 50,000 views. I should have expected Patricia to react. I did not expect her to create a rival address. On Sunday morning, workers arrived at her house carrying ladders, metal frames, and a stack of reflective panels. They spent 6 hours installing enormous silver numbers across her garage door. Her address was 4190. Each digit stood nearly 4 feet tall. When sunlight hit them, they reflected into my living room strongly enough to illuminate the refrigerator. Curtis came over wearing sunglasses. She escalated. She installed a commercial airport marker. You started it. I hired 1 airplane. He looked toward the glowing numbers. She has weaponized arithmetic. Patricia sent a neighborhood email that afternoon announcing a voluntary Address Pride weekend. Residents were encouraged to upgrade their numbers and demonstrate support for emergency visibility. The message included photographs of her new display and a reminder that my property remained non-compliant. Only 3 residents responded. One asked whether the giant numbers required architectural approval. Another said the reflection was frightening his cat. The third was from a woman named Melinda Frost, who lived near the back entrance. Her message contained one question. Why did the ambulance go to Patricia's house last winter when it was called for mine? The entire email thread became quiet. I read the question again. Melinda's husband had suffered a medical emergency in January. I remembered the ambulance entering the neighborhood, stopping near Patricia's house, then reversing and continuing down the road. At the time, everyone assumed the driver had simply missed the turn. Melinda posted again. The dispatcher told me our neighborhood address map was wrong. I reported it to the HOA 3 times. Patricia disabled replies. That was the mysterious part. The visibility initiative might not have started because numbers were too small. It might have started because the HOA had never corrected something much larger. I called Melinda. She answered on the second ring. Her husband had recovered, but the ambulance delay had lasted nearly 4 minutes. The digital map used by emergency services showed several Willow Bend addresses in the wrong locations, including hers. She had asked Patricia to contact the mapping department and update the private road information. Patricia told her larger house numbers would solve the issue. They won't, Melinda said. The ambulance was sent to the wrong part of the neighborhood. Did the board know? I emailed all of them. Did anyone answer? Patricia said she was handling it. I looked through the window toward the 4-foot digits reflecting sunlight across the street. She had not fixed the map. She had created a number rule. That changed everything. The airplane had begun as a joke. Now it was circling above a problem Patricia had tried to cover with polished metal. Monday's enforcement hearing was no longer going to be about whether my brass numbers were large enough. It was going to be about why the HOA had spent weeks measuring digits while emergency responders were following incorrect directions. Before I could prepare, Earl called. I saw the video. So did half of Oklahoma. I've got a question. What? Someone contacted us about Saturday's next flight. Who? They wouldn't say. What did they want? A second banner. I sat forward. What message? Earl hesitated. They want it flown behind yours. That sounds unsafe. Different altitude, same circle. What does it say? He read the message slowly. 4190. Ask her about the map. I looked across the street at Patricia's enormous silver numbers. Someone else had entered the sky. The anonymous second banner became the most discussed object in Willow Bend Estates before it had even left the ground. By Tuesday morning, 3 neighbors had asked me whether I had ordered it. 2 others wanted to know whether ask her about the map was a joke, a threat, or the beginning of what Curtis called airborne neighborhood journalism. Patricia sent a community-wide email accusing unnamed residents of spreading misinformation, but she never explained which part was supposedly false. That omission made everyone more curious. The Monday enforcement hearing had been postponed because Patricia claimed the board needed time to evaluate new complications. In reality, she needed time to figure out who had hired the second airplane. She contacted the aerial advertising company twice, demanded the customer's name, and reportedly became furious when Earl explained that private clients were not listed in neighborhood HOA records. Earl called me afterward. She asked whether the sky falls under architectural control. What did you tell her? I said only if she owns it. And? She said the HOA owns the visual character above the community. I stared at the phone. That sounds expensive. She also asked whether we accept cease and desist letters by email. Do you? We accept payment by email. Curtis was sitting at my kitchen table when I ended the call. He had brought binoculars, a folding map of the neighborhood, and a box of donuts labeled emergency response fuel. He spread the map beside my coffee and began marking every address Melinda said appeared incorrectly in the county system. There were 7. Her house number, 4236, appeared almost 4 blocks away. A cul-de-sac showed the wrong street name. 2 homes near the pond had numbers reversed. One empty drainage area was labeled as Patricia's property, which explained why emergency crews had once driven toward her house while searching for Melinda's. This is not a house number problem, Curtis said. No. This is a Patricia problem. That diagnosis appears accurate. Melinda joined us before lunch. She carried printed emails, screenshots from the emergency dispatcher's map, and a handwritten timeline of every time she contacted the HOA. The first email had been sent 8 months earlier. Patricia replied that larger numbers would reduce future confusion, then forwarded the matter to no one. The second email received no response. The third was marked resolved. Who marked it resolved? I asked. Melinda pointed toward Patricia's name at the bottom of the screenshot. She did. Was anything corrected? No. Did the board know? I copied them. Curtis studied the thread. Did anyone else answer? One board member asked Patricia whether she needed assistance. What did Patricia say? That it was under control. The phrase felt uglier than it should have. Patricia had turned a mapping error into a cosmetic campaign because cosmetics were easier to manage. She could inspect metal digits, issue notices, recommend a sign company, and claim progress without admitting the actual problem required, phone calls, documents, and the possibility that she had ignored a serious warning. Melinda folded her hands around her coffee cup. My husband was unconscious when the ambulance missed our street. Her voice remained calm, but the anger beneath it was unmistakable. I was standing outside waving both arms while they drove in the opposite direction. 4 minutes is not long until you are counting someone's breaths. The kitchen became quiet. Curtis removed his sunglasses, which he had somehow continued wearing indoors. What happened after? They found us. And your husband? He recovered. She smiled faintly. But Patricia came by the next afternoon and told me the incident proved everyone needed larger numbers. I looked toward the brass digits beside my front door. That was the shocking part. Patricia had used Melinda's emergency to justify a rule while concealing the reason the emergency crew became lost. The house number campaign was not about safety. It was camouflage. I asked Melinda whether she had hired the second banner. She shook her head. I thought you did. Curtis looked disappointed. I hoped it was the ambulance driver. We spent the afternoon trying to identify the anonymous customer. Earl refused to provide private information, and I respected that. The only clue was the wording. 4190. Ask her about the map. Whoever hired it knew Patricia's address, knew about the mapping problem, and wanted the question asked publicly. By Wednesday evening, the mystery had spread beyond the neighborhood. The original banner video continued gaining views, and Melinda posted a careful explanation beneath it. She did not accuse Patricia of causing the emergency delay. She simply shared the incorrect map, the emails she had sent, and the dates. Local comments changed immediately. People stopped laughing only at the giant numbers. Several paramedics explained that visible house numbers help only after crews reach the correct street. A retired dispatcher said digital mapping errors in private developments needed to be reported through official channels. One commenter asked why the HOA created a costly sign rule instead of correcting its road data. Patricia responded with a written statement. She claimed the HOA had no responsibility for county mapping systems. That statement might have protected her if she had not spent the previous month claiming the HOA's number initiative was necessary for emergency response. Residents noticed the contradiction. Thursday morning, I received a new violation notice. This one accused me of coordinating repeated aerial disturbances. It cited noise, privacy, traffic distraction, and community ridicule. The final charge interested me most because no section of the bylaws prohibited making the HOA look ridiculous. I walked across the street and knocked on Patricia's door. Her 4-foot silver numbers reflected my face before she opened it. "What do you want?" she asked. "To understand the notice." It is self-explanatory. Community ridicule is an offense now. You are using aircraft to humiliate the board. I hired one aircraft. You arranged the second banner. No, I do not believe you. That sounds personal. She folded her arms. You started this. You started measuring my father's numbers. I introduced a safety requirement. Why didn't you fix the map? Her expression changed. Only slightly. But enough. The map is not controlled by the HOA. Did you report the errors? I contacted the appropriate people. When? That information is not relevant to your violation. It is relevant to Melinda. This conversation is over. She began closing the door. I stopped it with one hand. Did you mark her complaint resolved? Patricia stared at me. I will not discuss another resident's correspondence. She showed it to me. Then she violated confidentiality. She showed me her own email. You are trying to create scandal from an administrative misunderstanding. An ambulance went to the wrong address and still reached her home. After losing 4 minutes, Patricia's voice hardened. You are not qualified to determine whether that delay mattered. Neither are you. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then sunlight struck her giant garage numbers and reflected directly into the open doorway. Patricia squinted and turned her head. I looked at the silver digits. Visible enough? She closed the door. That afternoon, the board finally scheduled the enforcement hearing for Friday evening, one day before the next airplane flight. Patricia hoped to stop Saturday's display through an emergency order. She also announced that the board would review false allegations concerning the map. The meeting promised to become crowded. Curtis volunteered to save seats. Melinda prepared copies of her emails. I brought the original brass number 7, which my father had removed and remounted 3 times because he kept drilling it crooked. The mystery of the second banner remained unresolved. Then a package arrived. It contained no return address. Inside was a small, handheld audio recorder and a note. Play file 3 at the hearing. Curtis read the note over my shoulder. This is either useful or how every crime documentary begins. I turned on the recorder. There were 5 audio files. The first contained road noise. The second captured someone entering a building. The third began with Patricia's voice. I recognized it immediately. She was speaking inside what sounded like the HOA office. "Do not send the map correction yet." A man answered. "Why not?" "Because if the county fixes it now, residents will say the visibility initiative was unnecessary." The room around me seemed to narrow. The man spoke again. "Patricia, the addresses are wrong." "I know. An ambulance already missed one, and larger numbers will demonstrate that we responded. That won't fix the map. It will show action." I stopped the recording. Curtis stared at me. Melinda covered her mouth. Nobody spoke for several seconds. The voice of the man was familiar, but I could not place it. We listened again. This time I noticed the sound of a printer, a metal drawer, and a squeaking office chair. The conversation was not edited. Patricia clearly acknowledged the mapping error and delayed reporting it because a correction would weaken her argument for the number rule. "That is worse than ignoring it," Melinda said. "Yes." "She chose not to fix it." "Yes." "Who recorded this?" "I don't know." File 4 contained the same man telling Patricia he would not support the sign mandate unless the mapping report was submitted. Patricia replied that he needed to remember who assigned committee positions. File 5 ended with a chair moving and a door closing. Curtis leaned back. Someone on the board recorded her. "Or someone working near the office," Melinda pointed toward the note. "They want it played publicly. Anonymous recordings can create problems. So can hiding an emergency map." She was right, but I wanted to know where it came from. I called Earl. "Did the second banner customer send you any audio?" "No." "Can you tell me whether the customer lives in Willow Bend?" "No." "Can you tell me whether it's a man or woman?" He paused. "No." That pause sounded like a man. "That pause sounded like my attorney." I thanked him and hung up. Friday evening, the Willow Bend clubhouse filled 30 minutes before the hearing. Residents stood along the walls, crowded near the doors, and watched Patricia arrange her papers at the front table. Her enormous silver house numbers had become a joke around the neighborhood, and several people arrived wearing homemade badges that read, "Legible from Orbit." Curtis wore one across his chest. He had made one for me, too. I refused to wear it until he threatened to give it to Patricia. The board consisted of Patricia and 4 other members: Denise Holloway, Marcus Bell, Joanne Price, and Vernon Tate. Vernon was absent. His empty chair became important the moment I heard the male voice speaking to Patricia through the clubhouse sound system during a microphone test. It was the same voice from the recorder. Vernon Tate. He was a retired city surveyor, chaired the Emergency Preparedness Committee, and had been strangely quiet throughout the address campaign. His absence suddenly felt deliberate. Patricia opened the meeting. This hearing concerns Mr. Nathan Cole's refusal to install approved house numbers and his ongoing use of aircraft to disrupt the community. I raised my hand. Will the board also discuss the incorrect emergency map? That matter is separate. Melinda stood near the front. It was the reason for the number initiative. Patricia struck the table with her pen. You will have an opportunity during resident comments. I had an emergency before I had an opportunity. The room reacted quietly. Patricia looked toward the board. We will proceed in order. She presented photographs of my brass numbers, measurements, and screenshots of the airplane banner. She described the flight as provocative, excessive, and harmful to neighborhood harmony. She also claimed the arrow created confusion regarding property boundaries. Curtis leaned toward me. It points at your roof. I may own more sky than expected. Patricia displayed an enlarged image of the banner. 4,172 down arrow, visible enough? Several residents applauded. She turned toward them. This is not a comedy show. From the back, someone called, Then why is the evidence funny? The meeting became difficult to control after that. Patricia argued that my refusal encouraged non-compliance. I explained that my current numbers remained readable, original to the home, and supported by no evidence of causing emergency confusion. I asked whether any ambulance, fire crew, police officer, delivery driver, or postal worker had ever failed to locate 4172. She admitted none had. Then I asked whether emergency crews had failed to locate 4236. Patricia looked toward Melinda. That involved mapping. Exactly. The two issues are different. Then why did you use her emergency to justify my new numbers? I did not use her emergency. Melinda held up the email. You referenced it in the announcement. Patricia glanced down at her papers. We had multiple safety concerns. Name another one, I said. She could not. Joanne Price leaned toward her microphone. Patricia, when did you report the mapping errors? Patricia answered carefully. The matter was forwarded for review. When? I do not have the exact date. Marcus Bell opened a folder. I requested the county correspondence this afternoon. Patricia looked at him. Why? Because residents asked. And? The county received the correction yesterday. The clubhouse fell silent. Joanne looked shocked. Yesterday? Marcus nodded. 8 months after Melinda's first email. All eyes turned toward Patricia. She tried to speak, but Melinda stood first. My husband's emergency was in January. Patricia raised one hand. The delay was administrative. I reached into my bag and placed the audio recorder on the table. I received this anonymously. Patricia stared at it. What is that? A recording. Of what? You. Her face changed completely. Not anger. Fear. I pressed play. Her own voice filled the clubhouse. Do not send the map correction yet. Nobody moved. The recording continued. Because if the county fixes it now, residents will say the visibility initiative was unnecessary. By the time it ended, even the people standing near the door were silent. Patricia looked toward the empty chair beside her. Where did you get that? I don't know. You recorded a private conversation? No. This is illegal. That depends on how and where it was recorded. You cannot use anonymous audio as evidence. Marcus Bell removed his glasses. That was Vernon's voice. Patricia turned toward him. It could be manipulated. Joanne shook her head. I heard that conversation through the office wall. Every face moved toward her. Patricia stared. Joanne continued. I did not hear every word, but I heard Vernon tell you the map had to be corrected. Why didn't you say anything? I believed you sent it. Melinda's voice was quiet. She didn't. Patricia tried to return to my violation. She claimed the recording had no connection to the airplane. I agreed that the first flight was unrelated. The airplane had started as a funny response to an absurd demand. The second banner was different. It was a question someone believed the neighborhood needed to see. At that moment, the clubhouse door opened. Vernon Tate walked inside. He wore a dark jacket, carried a weathered leather case, and looked exhausted. Every person in the room watched him approach the front table. Patricia stood. Vernon. He did not look at her. He looked at me. I hired the second plane. The mystery ended in 6 words. The room erupted. Vernon waited until the noise faded. I also made the recording. Patricia's face went pale. You had no right. I was present. You were recording without my consent. This state allows a participant to record a conversation. He placed his leather case on the table. And I recorded it because you told me to delay correcting emergency address data. Patricia shook her head. I told you to wait until the visibility policy was implemented. That is the same thing. I was trying to build support for safety improvements. You were protecting your campaign. I was protecting consistency. You were protecting yourself. Vernon opened the leather case and removed printed county forms, correspondence logs, and a corrected map. I submitted the correction yesterday. You had no authority. I chair emergency preparedness. You went around me. An ambulance already went around the neighborhood. The line struck the room like a hammer. Even Curtis did not joke. Vernon apologized directly to Melinda. He said he should have reported the error immediately, instead of allowing Patricia to delay him. He admitted that hiring the second banner was not his most professional decision. Curtis raised his hand. It was extremely legible. A few people laughed, breaking the tension. Vernon almost smiled. I thought residents deserved to ask the question before Patricia buried the map issue beneath another enforcement hearing. Patricia looked toward the other board members. This is a coordinated attack. No, Joanne said. This is the result of not listening. Marcus closed his folder. The address rule should be suspended. Patricia's head snapped toward him. We cannot abandon a safety initiative because of one administrative error. 7 addresses are incorrect. The numbers still need improvement. Joanne pointed toward my house number photograph. Can you read Nathan's number? Patricia said nothing. Can you? Yes? Then his number is not the emergency. The hearing ended without a vote on my violation. Instead, the board postponed all enforcement related to address size until the corrected emergency map was confirmed. Marcus proposed allowing residents to keep existing numbers if they were readable from the street. Joanne seconded it. Patricia refused to call the vote. Vernon reminded her that 3 board members could request one. They did. The motion passed 3-1. My brass numbers stayed. Patricia did not lose her position, and no corruption investigation appeared from nowhere. She simply lost control of the policy she had built around her own delay. That was the beginning of the revenge. The real payoff was scheduled for Saturday. Earl called me at 8 that evening. Tomorrow's flight is still confirmed. Good. Vernon canceled the second banner. That makes sense. But someone ordered a third. I closed my eyes. What does it say? Earl laughed before answering. Correct map below. Thank you. 4172. I looked at Vernon. He shook his head. Melinda smiled. Curtis raised both hands. I may know several residents with a shared credit card. Saturday was no longer going to be my private joke. The entire neighborhood had joined the flight plan. Saturday morning began with lawn chairs. By 9, residents had gathered along Willow Bend's curved streets, carrying coffee, homemade signs, and enough folding furniture to suggest a parade route had been approved overnight. Curtis wore his legible from orbit badge. Melinda brought her husband in a sun hat, and Vernon stood near the pond pretending he had not once paid money to put Patricia's address in the sky. I remained on my porch beneath the original brass numbers. They looked exactly as they always had. Small, warm, slightly tarnished, and perfectly readable from the street. Patricia's 4-foot silver numbers across from me reflected sunlight into the neighborhood with the intensity of a distress signal. She had covered them with a white tarp that morning, possibly because 3 drivers had slowed down and mistaken them for an address belonging to a warehouse. Unfortunately, the tarp transformed the front of her house into something resembling a failed magic trick. At 10:15, the airplane appeared. No one needed binoculars. The engine approached from the south, and the banner unfolded slowly behind it as the pilot climbed above Willow Bend Estates. Residents lifted their phones, children pointed skyward, and Curtis placed one hand over his heart as though witnessing the national anthem of unnecessary visibility. The banner read, Correct map below. Thank you. 4172. A large downward arrow followed the message. This time, it did not point only toward my roof. It pointed toward a massive temporary neighborhood map spread across the community lawn. Vernon had printed the corrected emergency map on weatherproof vinyl. Every street, cul-de-sac, pond, drainage path, and house number appeared in clear, color-coded sections. Melinda's home was finally marked in the correct location. The reversed numbers near the pond had been fixed, and Patricia's property no longer occupied a drainage ditch. The map had been reviewed by the county the previous afternoon. It was accurate. It was visible. And unlike Patricia's number campaign, it solved the actual problem. Residents applauded as the airplane completed its first circle. Patricia emerged from her house before the second one. She wore dark glasses, a pale blue blouse, and the expression of someone trying to appear calm while her own neighborhood thanked another man's house number from the sky. She crossed the street, stopped near the giant map, and looked toward Vernon. You had no authority to install this. It is temporary. It is on common property. The board approved it last night. I did not approve it. 3 members did. You cannot hold votes without the president. Joanne Price stepped forward from the crowd. We did not hold a formal board meeting. We approved a temporary safety display by written consent under the emergency information provision. Patricia stared at her. You used my own policy. Joanne nodded. We finally used it for an emergency. Several residents laughed. Patricia turned toward me. This is your revenge. I looked at the banner. My revenge had larger numbers. This is humiliation. No, this is a corrected map. You are using a safety issue to embarrass me. You used a safety issue to sell 12-inch numbers. Her jaw tightened. The plane passed overhead again. Correct map below. Thank you for 172. Curtis raised both thumbs toward the pilot. Patricia looked around the community lawn. Residents had begun walking across the map, locating their homes and checking the corrected streets. Vernon explained how emergency dispatchers would use the updated data. Melinda showed several neighbors where the ambulance had originally been directed and how far it had traveled before turning around. Nobody was yelling at Patricia. That made it worse for her. They were learning without her. A local fire captain arrived just after 11. His name was Aaron Delgado, and he lived 2 neighborhoods away. He was not there as an official investigator or rescuer. Vernon had invited him to explain address visibility from an emergency response perspective and to review the corrected layout before residents submitted final comments. Patricia approached him immediately. "Captain, I assume you agree that larger house numbers improve response time?" Aaron nodded. Readable numbers help once crews reach the right location. She smiled. "Exactly. But accurate mapping comes first." Her smile disappeared. He pointed toward my house. "I can read 4172 from here." We stood nearly 50 feet away. Curtis leaned toward me. "Professional eyesight confirmed." Aaron continued. "Contrast, lighting, obstruction, and placement matter more than forcing every home to use the same oversized design. Reflective numbers can help at night, but 4-inch numbers may be perfectly acceptable if they're visible from the road." Patricia crossed her arms. "The initiative followed safety guidance." "Which guidance?" She hesitated. "A seminar." "Was it specific to this neighborhood?" "No." "Did the speaker recommend 12-inch matching silver numbers?" "Not in those exact words." "Did they recommend using one sign vendor?" "That was a purchasing decision." Aaron looked toward her garage. "Did they recommend 4-foot digits?" A child nearby laughed. Patricia removed her sunglasses. "My display was meant to demonstrate commitment." Curtis whispered, "The commitment can be seen from Kansas." I stepped on his shoe before Patricia heard him. The Saturday flight continued for nearly 40 minutes. Every pass drew less laughter and more attention toward the corrected map. Residents photographed their streets, checked house placements, and volunteered missing details about alley access, locked gates, and hydrant locations. The airplane had become background noise. The real spectacle was 30 families finally solving a problem that one woman had buried beneath a decorative rule. Melinda's husband, Paul, approached Patricia near the map. He moved carefully with a cane, but carried himself with quiet steadiness. Patricia seemed surprised to see him. She had spoken about his emergency repeatedly, but until that morning I doubted she had ever held a real conversation with him. "I'm glad you recovered," she said. Paul nodded. "So am I. The number policy was intended to prevent what happened to you." "No." His voice remained gentle. "The corrected map prevents what happened to me." Patricia looked away. Paul continued. "The paramedics found our numbers when they reached our street. They couldn't find our street." "I understand that now." "You understood it 8 months ago." She had no answer. Paul rested both hands on the top of his cane. "My wife asked you for help. I believe the visibility initiative was the fastest solution. You heard Vernon say it would not fix the map." Patricia glanced toward the crowd. "You don't know every detail." "I know I was unconscious while my wife watched an ambulance drive away." The laughter around the lawn stopped. Patricia's shoulders lowered slightly. For the first time, she did not defend the policy. "I made the wrong decision," she said. Melinda stood beside her husband. "Yes." Patricia took a breath. "I should have sent the correction immediately." "Yes. I thought if we changed the numbers first, residents would see that the board had responded." "You wanted to look useful," Melinda said. Patricia looked at her. "I wanted people to trust the board." "Trust does not come from looking useful." That sentence remained in the air longer than the airplane banner. Patricia did not apologize dramatically. She did not resign. She did not burst into tears or confess to a hidden crime. She simply stood on the community lawn beneath an enormous map showing the mistake she had delayed correcting, and realized that every resident now understood exactly what she had done. That consequence suited her better. She had spent years managing appearances. Now appearance could not save her from clarity. The next HOA meeting took place the following Wednesday. It was the shortest meeting Willow Bend Estates had held in 3 years, mainly because Patricia no longer gave 12-minute introductions to 5-minute topics. The board formally replaced the mandatory silver number policy with a practical visibility standard based on readability, contrast, lighting, and emergency access. Residents could keep existing numbers if they could be read from the street. My brass numbers passed easily. Curtis volunteered to test them from 3 locations and claimed the process required a lawn chair and lemonade. Joanne rejected his methodology, but accepted his conclusion. The board also adopted a new emergency data procedure. Mapping complaints had to be forwarded within 2 business days, documented publicly, and reviewed by the Emergency Preparedness Committee. No president could mark a safety issue resolved without confirmation from the resident who reported it. Patricia voted in favor. She did not look at Melinda while doing it. That Saturday, the airplane returned for the final scheduled flight. I considered canceling it. The map was fixed, the rule had changed, and Patricia's giant silver numbers were already being removed because the reflection violated a different section of the HOA's lighting standards. Continuing the joke felt unnecessary. Then Earl called. "Do you still want the usual banner?" "No." "What should it say?" I looked at the brass numbers my father had installed. The first 3 drill holes remained hidden behind the wooden plaque. I could still picture him standing on the porch, insisting the crooked 7 was caused by the wall rather than his measurements. My mother had laughed until he threatened to number every room inside the house. "Change the message," I said. "To what?" I gave him 6 words. The plane arrived just before noon. Residents came outside expecting another joke. Patricia stood near her garage, where workers had removed the 4-foot digits and exposed several rectangular patches in the paint. Curtis claimed the blank areas made the house look like it had forgotten its own password. The banner unfolded above us. 4172. Small number. Big memory. Nobody laughed immediately. I looked toward the brass numerals beside my door. My father had mounted them when the house was new, before the ponds, before the HOA, before anyone tried to turn safety into matching hardware. They had remained through birthdays, funerals, holidays, storms, and the final years when my parents could no longer maintain the home alone. The numbers had never been important because of their size. They were important because they had stayed. Melinda walked up my driveway. Your father installed those? He did. They are crooked. Only the 7. The 4 leans too. That is structural character. Curtis joined us. I can read the character from the sidewalk. The airplane circled one final time. Patricia crossed the street slowly. She stopped beside the porch and studied the brass numbers. Without the clipboard, measuring tape, or giant sample, she looked less like an HOA president and more like a tired neighbor who had spent too much time defending an idea that no longer had supporters. I should not have demanded you remove them, she said. No. They do meet the new standard. They met the old reality. She almost smiled. Are the flights finished? Yes. Completely? I still have Earl's number. Her expression changed. I laughed. So did you. Patricia looked toward the disappearing airplane. Your father would have found this ridiculous. He absolutely would. Would he have approved? He would have asked whether the pilot gave senior discounts. That finally made her laugh. It was brief and reluctant, but real. The neighborhood did not suddenly become perfect. Patricia remained president until the next election, though the board began sharing responsibilities more evenly. Residents questioned decisions sooner. Emergency information received priority over decorative campaigns, and nobody allowed the phrase community consistency to end an argument by itself. Vernon never admitted how much he paid for the second banner. Curtis claimed the amount should be disclosed under airborne ethics rules. Melinda and Paul started keeping a printed emergency map near their front door. The corrected digital data went live the following month, and Aaron Delgado confirmed that dispatch now showed every Willow Bend address in the proper location. My original brass numbers stayed beside the door. I polished them once a year. Not too much. My father believed brass should look old enough to know something. The airplane banner became a framed photograph in my hallway. It showed 4172 stretched across the Oklahoma sky, with the arrow pointing toward a house whose numbers supposedly could not be seen. Visitors always asked whether the story was true. I told them the same thing. The HOA asked for larger numbers, so I gave them the largest address display legally available without launching a satellite. The joke worked because Patricia had confused visibility with safety, uniformity with competence, and action with progress. In the end, the smallest numbers in Willow Bend exposed the largest mistake. That is exactly the kind of neighborhood logic we remember at Sovereign Verdict, where common sense does not always arrive quietly, and sometimes circles overhead every Saturday. Subscribe for more original HOA battles, ridiculous revenge, and homeowners who know that when someone demands visibility, the truth may need a very large banner.